But we've given a lot of sugar, a lot of sweet. Saved, heaven, saved from death and hell. It's time for a little spicy. Okay? Because we've talked about justification. We've talked about salvation, right? And we said that justification is God declaring us what? Righteous, not guilty. Well, now we have to talk about what happens when God does have to declare us guilty. And that is condemnation. Okay? The 10th term is condemnation. And condemnation is the act of God declaring someone guilty. Most people on earth fail to understand just what it takes to be condemned, to be declared guilty, right? We have this tendency to think, well, I'm a mostly good person, right? I don't kill or steal or all these other things. We have that tendency. But we've referenced it a couple of times already. Remember what 1 John says, that He's light. He's light. There's absolutely no darkness in Him. And if those two things cannot occupy the same space, then friend, I got to tell you, there is no good enough. There's no such thing as being mostly light. Right? To be in God's presence, it's either all light or it's all absence of light, which is darkness. How many of us can say that for ourselves? That we're absolutely light, absolutely perfect. Right? So what does that mean? Every one of us is condemned. Every one of us is declared guilty. Yeah, that's exactly what it means. If left on our own, we are doomed. This is another thing people don't understand. They go, I don't need God to save. No, you don't understand. If He doesn't, you got no hope. There is no plan B. You can't do nothing. If He doesn't save you, there's no salvation coming, right? The Bible tells us that God has actually given us a list of rules, right? It's called the law, the Mosaic Law. If you read the whole Bible, it's actually 613 rules, regulations, that if you could follow all of them from day one of life to day whatever, end of life, perfectly, never ever infract on any of them, then you would be declared by God's standard perfect, okay? The problem is it's not possible. And God knew that it wasn't possible. God never intended for it to be possible, right? It's a list of rules that was never intended to save you. We're going to find out in Romans, salvation never came by following rules. It never did from the very beginning. It always came by faith. God gave the rules not to tell you how you, go try. That's what we did to it. You understand that? That's what we did. We saw rules. I can be better than that person, and that person. That wasn't what God gave us the rules for. He gave us the rules to show us what perfection looked like, but it was impossible to follow. The book of James describes the law, these rules that God gives, this standard of perfection. He says, what this is a mirror, okay? James depicts the law as a mirror, and its job is not to make you righteous, but to show you that you aren't there. It's to show you the stain on your face. It's to say, this is what perfect looks like. Now go look. You are not that, right? And the mirror, if you think about a mirror is never intended to actually clean you, right? You don't ever see somebody with a mustard stain on their face and they go up and they wipe their face on a mirror. That would be stupid, right? What do? That's where the stain is, and then they go and they take something and they wipe it off, right? The law, just like a mirror, was never intended to make someone righteous or perfect. Thus, following rules, following regulations was never the way. Because you were supposed to look at that and go, wow, God's standards are so much higher than I ever have had for me and myself. How could I ever do that? Again, this is what the Sermon on the Mount is for. It takes those 613 laws and multiplies them, makes them even higher, okay? Jesus says, you don't understand, without me, you have no hope, right? But thankfully, God has provided a way to remove that stain by Jesus, right? Condemnation comes because of the stain, right? The stain that all of us have because of our sin. But listen to this. Listen to what Paul says in Romans 8. In Romans 8, verse 1. Now, if you know Romans 7 is actually, we're probably going to have to break that one down into 2 chapters because that's like my favorite chapter in the whole Bible. I check sometimes to see if Romans 7 is there all the time, just to make sure it hasn't left. But after Paul does, he does Romans 7, he says in chapter 8, verse 1, he says, therefore, no condemnation now exists for those in Jesus Christ. None. There's no stain. All that sin has been removed. Anybody who's in Christ, who's got faith in him, has accepted his gift of salvation, this propitiation, this payment, right, for his sin. Everybody who's accepted the propitiation payment, they are now justified, declared righteous, and they are made right with God. They are reconciled. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that cool? I love that. Condemnation is terrifying until you realize Jesus has removed the condemnation. There is no condemnation. Condemnation doesn't exist for those who are putting their hope in Jesus. It's not a worry in the world. I think it's great.